Good evening, everybody. If I can just draw your attention. My name is Roisin Wood. I'm the director of Kick It Out. And I wanted to thank you tonight for coming to this event, debate on the Y word.
But for some reason, a lot of fans still shout this word, and it begins with Y.
What they're chanting is a racist word for Jews, the Y word.
Why am I against the use of the Y word? To me, growing up in Leeds, I was occasionally, I'm not going to exaggerate this, occasionally called that word. Chelsea, Leeds, West Ham fans use it against Spurs fans as an anti-Semitic epithet. And that's how it was used towards me as a kid. Not every day, occasionally. But when someone wanted to use an anti-Semitic term towards me in a pejorative way, that was the word that was used. So I grew up in the same way that if I was black and I was called the N-word, or if I was from an Asian background and I was called the P-word, I grew up feeling that was an anti-Semitic term, a vile term, used in a very bad, negative way to hurt me. I would like to continue to say to Ivan, but in a way more importantly, the 99% of Spurs fans who aren't Jewish, who have reclaimed a word which they have no right to reclaim because they're not actually Jewish in the first place. I would like to say to them, please don't use it. I'd rather you didn't. And I hope in a year or 2 or 3 that it's not used.
The booing of black players is now acknowledged to be beyond the pale, unacceptable. People do get arrested for it, people get kicked out, people get banned for life. And as part of that, I think it's great and it's to be welcomed that we are discussing the Jewish issue alongside it. It's never been as much of a problem, but it still is an issue that we all put up with and never discussed. I don't remember that phrase being coined until they made that film. I don't remember us saying that that word was an unsayable word, like the N-word, until that film was made. And I personally don't have that visceral fear of it that Anthony has. And I actually feel like the word Jew can be a nasty word if it's said in the wrong way. And it's more that the intent that's there than the word itself, especially in this particular case. And so, for me, if the Spurs fans are singing it in their mind benevolently, with no anti-Semitic intent, then for me, I do not feel threatened by it, and I do not think that that should be the target of a campaign against it, even if Anthony wants to try to persuade them, maybe it's not the most the most well-advised thing to do. And so I feel that targeting that as part of a campaign to finally raise the issue of anti-Semitism in football is the wrong target, actually. And you could look at it in some ways as the easy target, because it's probably a lot easier to start trying to stop people singing that word benevolently than stride in amongst some of the thugs that are still singing the nasty stuff, and they're the ones that I'd like to make a target. It shouldn't be used as an excuse that, they're singing a song about the gas chambers and the concentration camps because the Spurs fans are singing a word, with no malevolent intent. There's no excuse for that, and that is what there should be zero tolerance of. And that in some senses this is all a diversion from that. And 3 Spurs fans were prosecuted for using the Y word, and the prosecution collapsed or didn't go ahead because they don't have any malevolent intent. But when did we last hear of a Chelsea fan or a West Ham fan or whoever it is being prosecuted for making these hissing noises and singing about Adolf Hitler?
The Y word has brought out a discussion which didn't happen before, for the reasons that these gentlemen have said. When I go down to the Arsenal, or I go to West Ham, or I go to Chelsea, I actually go to the Arsenal more than the others, it starts with a Y word. And then it starts about hating Tottenham. And for years I was paranoid. Are they saying they really hate Tottenham or do they hate Jews? When Tottenham come and play, they go further. They sing about Auschwitz. They make gas chamber hissing noises. In October, there's a song at the moment about Giroud, and various Arsenal fans were singing "Hey Jude" to the same tune. Witty maybe, but frightening when it's added to gas chamber noises. I'm afraid that when people use the Y word, even as a badge of honour, which we'll hear about in a minute, I think, and I've been on Radio 5 Live and had arguments with people like this gentleman here, it's yes, no, I don't think Tottenham fans should be prosecuted if they're not being malicious, of course not. But what I do think is it leads a dangerous precedent, which is used by racists in clubs, especially in London, and further afield. There's on the case books of the FA a year ago, a referee in Manchester, and the Manchester FA, who was brought up with charges of anti-Semitism many a year ago, and quite a horrific case in the local leagues here. So it's not just a London thing. It's a London thing, it's a Polish thing, it's a Ukrainian thing, it's an Eastern European thing, it's increasingly a French thing thanks to Dieudonné and the Quinel.
I have a problem with the Y word. I am not the Y word, I am a yid. I am a yid because I'm a Spurs supporter, but more importantly, I am a yid because I'm Jewish. And in the same way as David said, you could be called a Jew in an ignorant, racist context. It can be used in a positive context. For me, context is everything. Now, I was at Spurs last night, and at half... Can you hear me all right at the back? Ledley King, who is a legend, was brought on at half-time. He's retired now. He's got his testimonial, and deservedly so, at the end of this season. The minute he came out, everybody at the ground would start calling him yiddo, yiddo. It is a badge meaning Spurs supporter within the context of White Hart Lane. Jermaine Defoe, he's a yiddo. Doesn't mean Jermaine Defoe is Jewish. It doesn't mean that he should be castigated. It means he is part of the Spurs family, and it's used in that context. Now, interestingly, when the 3 Spurs fans were arrested, and I have no idea how 3 were selected out of 30,000, and I have no idea why it took so long to come to a conclusion that they hadn't broken any laws, as far as I could tell. The Spurs fans took it on themselves to sing it even louder and more vociferously, and sing with it, "We're Spurs, we'll sing what we want." It's a proper, decent word used in the right context. Now, it differs from, and I will say the N word and the P word, because it does have a positive context. It does have a positive meaning. When the Baddiels put the film out, the first thing I did was write to David Baddiel and tell him that instead of looking at Spurs fans and saying, we're going to ban this word, he needs to clean up the mess in his own backyard first. Instead of saying Spurs fans should not be saying yid, yiddo, or even yid army, which, by the way, my wife used to be a member of. She was in the IDF, so she is yid army. He needs to be standing up against the people at Chelsea. He's a well enough known person that he has the ability to stand up and take a stand. He doesn't take a stand against where the true anti-Semitism is coming from. And the problem is not Spurs fans, because we have anti-Semites at Spurs. The problem is elsewhere. And it's not just a London problem, you asked earlier. It used to be a problem when we went up to Leeds. Leeds have a hardcore of anti-Semites amongst their fans. West Ham are well known. Chelsea and Millwall. These are the ones that I recognise as the most, having the hardest core of anti-Semites. Chelsea, we saw last week, over 400 Chelsea fans running amok in Paris, in areas of Paris where ethnic minorities live, making Hitler salutes and singing Sieg Heil. Now, this is the real problem. Not Spurs fans going, we're the Yids, we're Yid Army, Jermaine Defoe is Yiddo. That's where the problem lies. That's where it needs to be dealt with.
I agree with Ivan that the hardcore fans of Leeds, as I remember, West Ham, as he says, Chelsea, when you try and argue with them and say, can you stop saying that? And obviously, again, you have to be very brave to do that. But when you talk to people like that and they say they call themselves it. Now, yes, they do, because I've had arguments with West Ham and my own fans from Leeds who've said that. In other words, they've said, why should we stop using it? Secondly, it's been, I think, an encouragement whether it's positive or not, which I kind of accept, as I said earlier, it is, whether it's positive or not, it has encouraged Chelsea, West Ham, Leeds and so on to actually come out with far worse than that, far worse than the Y word, after Spurs fans have been chanting it. But thirdly, I must go straight to the nub of the matter. The Y word is offensive to me, yeah? I mean, it was used against me, it was used against people in my community when I was growing up. I think, therefore, you have to respect a Jewish person who isn't a Spurs fan if he or she says that I don't like that word, because I've heard it's been used negatively throughout my life. I just think that the word itself has been used in a race hate way, and therefore you should respect Jewish people who feel that that is used against them. What I'm saying is 99% of Spurs fans aren't Jewish. How come they have a right to reclaim a word which some Jews, I admit some Jews, not all Jews, find offensive? They have no right to reclaim that word, because I don't want them to reclaim it. Just like a black person who's offended by the N-word will say to me, "You've got no right to use the N-word." Completely true. Yeah, I wouldn't. But if I was supporting a team where there are a lot of black players and it has a history of black support, and I think I will reclaim that word, I'll reclaim the N-word. You'd laugh me out. Not laugh me out. You'd say you're mad. You'd say you're wrong.
I've got the greatest respect and admiration and affection for Anthony, but I think he's wrong. We live in a liberal democracy. We treasure freedom of speech. I think many people in this room are Jewish. In a week's time, less than a week's time, we will be rejoicing over freedom. Not the kind of freedom where you can eat bread, but the kind of freedom where you're told not to eat bread. But we're rejoicing. Freedom from slavery and freedom. And I think in a liberal democracy, you have the right to be offended. You cannot legislate against being offended. Pure and simple. And if you try and do that, there is no debate. What you have is a situation of demagoguery. You stifle debate. And if you stifle debate, you stifle the Jewish community. Because if you put two Jews in a room, you have 4 opinions. Pure and simple. Now, let me go on further. It was mentioned earlier, just one point, it was mentioned earlier that it encourages people to use it against us. For me, this is the same argument that says that women who dress provocatively are asking to be raped. I don't hold with either of those arguments. I think they're both wrong. It doesn't encourage anti-Semitism. It's already there, and it needs to be addressed where it occurs.
30 odd years ago, I was at White Hart Lane at a Spurs Leeds game as a guest of a friend of Maurice Keston's, and I'm sat in the West Stand eating a bagel and watching the game, and it'll bring back painful memories to you. Leeds were 3 up in 12 minutes. You might recall the game. Bremner scored twice, Alan Clark scored, they missed it open. It was 10 minutes of golden football in the great Leeds days. And I was sat with Tottenham fans in the West Stand at White Hart Lane. And one of the guys I was with said, "That effing ginger Scottish bastard Bremner, he's a genius. I wish we had him." Now, if the guy would have stood up today and said the same thing, which of the 6 would he have been nicked for? He's a ginner. He's Scottish. He's small. He's a bastard. Where does it end?
I just wonder whether banning a word is just not even addressing the issue of racism. It's just changing the insults, and language always change. I just think there's a lot of moral posturing in the Kick It Out campaign, as if all football fans are racist hooligans who needed reminding of their etiquette. But racism is, well, I think that there are people with racist views. I think racism is not acceptable in polite society generally. I think we need more open and robust debate and less patronising of football fans, and stand up for free speech and kicking censorship out of football. Thank you.
I'm going to disagree with some of that, but anyway.
Hi there. Are any of the panel familiar with the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act Scotland? That's something that's sort of been in my mind the whole way through this debate, especially when talking about legislation, and especially when what we were just talking about there about open debate rather than censorship of football fans. That's, for those that aren't familiar with it, that's an act which has basically criminalised the word Fenian and the word orange in the wrong context in Scotland at football matches. You can be arrested for singing songs and saying things at a football match or on the way to a football match that you cannot be arrested for and charged for, not at a football match. Obviously, growing up in Glasgow, we've had our own problems with football and intolerance, and I think we're actually getting a lot better. But this act has sort of taken actually things backwards. So what you're getting now is Celtic fans and Rangers fans singing the songs that were once pushed out of the ground. They're now singing it in, as was mentioned before, in kind of an anti-establishment kind of thing. And I worry that legislating against the Y word could have a similar effect, and really it's not really dealing with the real problem here.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word in the street.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word in a supermarket.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word at a football match. Back in the 1930s and 40s, Jewish people all over Europe were being rounded up and killed. People called them yids.
So if, in today's game, you fancy joining in with what you think is a bit of harmless chanting,
think again.
think again.
My 3 clients, what they have been put through for a long, long time, many months, from the time the FA gave their statement, and then Kick It Out gave their statement, and then the arrest, the orchestration behind it, and then being bailed back to the police station, taking time off work and everything else. When they were charged, then having their names, addresses, street addresses released to the press. Then there was a court adjournment because for various reasons, and then the day before the first court hearing, the CPS discontinued the case. It was all for nothing. Why that couldn't have been made known at the point of charge, well before, God knows where they obviously weren't talking to each other, they met in the CPS. But this whole thing has come to nothing.
I want to be able to take my 5-year-old to a football match without hearing chanting about Auschwitz, and I don't think that's too much to ask for. And I only think now people are starting to listen to what Anthony was saying on television, what I was saying on television, and what this man writes in his column in The Guardian, and I'm pleased about that.
Just very quickly, I'm not a lawyer. I've got very little experience of the law, apart from one period of jury service. But for me, to follow on with what I said earlier, it's not about being offended. I think being offended is part of living in a free, tolerant society. However, I think we need to distinguish between what's offensive and what is hatred. And I think the law does distinguish this, that if you are making statements which are incitements to hatred, which could lead to physical violence, then for me that needs to be against the law. And when fans are singing Spurs are on their way to Auschwitz, and this happened to me at Chelsea, and I reported it to a copper who turned around and said, well, what do you expect if you come to Stamford Bridge? A few years ago. I think we need to distinguish. Offence is good. Hatred, incitement to hatred, should be against the law, period.
Nobody on this panel is talking about banning or prosecuting. Obviously, if you had David or Ivor, not Ivor, Badil, here, they'd be putting that case. So, first of all, I think it was wrong. And everything I've written about this, I've always said, in fact, I said it was preposterous. I think the Society of Black Lawyers were the first to come up with this preposterous notion of prosecuting Spurs fans. So it's completely and utterly wrong. But it's not a question of becoming a race hate word. It is and was a race hate word. Oswald Mosley in the 1930s used the race hate word Yid, in the same way that his successors would, when he himself would then attack the black community with the N-word after the war. So Jews in the East End of London were suffering stress and the strain of that, and therefore the folk memory and the most recent memory of me as someone who has been called that is I've been called that as a race hate word against me. So it's not a question of it making it a race hate word. It is a race hate word. No, hold on. You can't disagree. If I say to me it's a race hate word because it's directed at me, you can't say that I'm not experiencing it as a race hate word if somebody has called me that at school or somebody recently calls me that. But what you can disagree with on this, and it's a free country, as Ivan said, you can disagree, and I disagree, with anyone who uses that word in a positive way being prosecuted, because that's a nonsense, complete nonsense. But you should also listen to the Jewish fans who aren't supporters of Spurs, many of whom I know who've said they don't like it. And also, when I go to White Hart Lane, I'll say this again. When somebody runs past me singing that, the yids, in a very aggressive way, and, I know that most of them aren't Jewish, I don't like it. I don't want them to do it. I would like to stop them and say, please, don't do it. I'd like to say to you tonight, and to Ivan, please don't do it. It's your right to say to me, no, we will carry on saying it. But I'd still like to say that to you. So that's what the argument is. I think you should respect that, whereas I also respect your right to defend people who are prosecuted for it.
Hi there, Kevin Coleman from the FA. Just want to make a couple of very quick points to some of the comments before. Around the N-word and the P-word, those words have tried to be reclaimed before, and those communities have rejected generally that reclamation and have found those words offensive. Around the hissing points, the ground regulations in Scotland, the ground regulations in England have been changed on the back of John Mann's report, so now hissing is now covered in ground regulations because it now covers noises. The minimum 5-match ban is part of FIFA's recommendations and was agreed by all the governing, all the football bodies, like the Football League, the PFA, etc. So that was agreed by all the bodies in this country. And my one question, I think the panel have made some really good arguments, and I can understand everything you're saying. I wouldn't wholly disagree with anything that the panel has said. The issue you've got is the law. Are you going to pick and choose who you mete out the law against? If someone is a Spurs supporter and finds racially offensive what another Spurs supporter is saying, are you going to say to them, we've decided we're not going to prosecute in this case because we don't want to? Does the law not apply to everybody? And that's the law, the football rules that the FA implements, and the law of the land, the Equality Act.
I don't believe in banning words, period. I'm a great believer in freedom. And the gentleman from the FA, whose name I didn't catch, all I can say is, if the N-word is illegal, Kanye West will never perform here again. If you've ever heard his most recent album. The American black community have reclaimed that word. Now, maybe the British community have not yet, but if you listen to the album Yeezus, it's on almost every single track. But you said, how do you pick and choose who you prosecute? Sorry? And I'm a Yid.
I have a very, very dear close friend who's black guy who calls me up and says, "You Jewish bastard, and that's you black bastard." If anybody turned on him, I'd be in the train sheet with him in a heartbeat, as he would with me.
And I agree.
It's context.
I agree. That's been my point throughout the whole evening. When I'm in America, I have black friends who call me the N-word as part of their community. So context for me is everything. And this is why I disagree with Anthony. For Anthony, it seems to be a blanket prohibition. For me, it's all about context.
In that situation, you and your friend called each other, and the bystander heard that, who was offended, and they not get to which has happened.
And my view is that offence is part of living in a liberal democracy, where freedom of speech is valued.
I would have thought in that case, that prosecution wouldn't succeed because any prosecution has to prove the malicious intent, that there is some racial hatred there. Not that you said a word that somebody else could be offended by. But when you said before about hissing has now become part of ground regulations, have we seen any prosecutions for it?
No.
Right. Now we're hearing a lot of stories here that there are supporters of other clubs who are still and increasingly making hissing noises in reference to gas chambers at football matches in England in 2014. And if that is against the law, which it is, and against football's own regulations, which it is, and against the complete spirit of football and kick it out, then we want to see some action against them. If you stamp that out first, then maybe you can have a conversation about how appropriate is the word yid by Spurs fans, but they are not singing it malevolently or with anti-Semitic intent. So let's have a go at the people who are being malevolent and anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
On the issue of reclamation, okay, if you're black, you have a right, to reclaim that word. And yeah, I note that at schools, if a black person calls another black person that word, they are still, hauled up in front of the headmaster or headmistress and told in a public place it's wrong. Secondly, if you're black, you have a right to reclaim the N-word. I would agree within the privacy of your own home or whatever. But if you are not Jewish, you don't have a right to reclaim a word which is perceived by me and a lot of people I know to be a race hate word. It's straightforward. No.
Anthony, how do you explain the prevalence of the word gay in society today? Gay is a word that has multiple meanings, as does yid.
Yeah.
Nobody's got the right to claim ownership, total ownership of a word. There's multiple meanings.
I think, yeah, I agree. But sorry, I just want to answer what David just said. I'm not saying people should be prosecuted. I'm saying I want to put it to you. If I was black, I would like to put it to you. If you're white, don't use the N-word. I'm Jewish, and I'm saying to you, Tottenham fans who aren't Jewish, I don't think you've got a right to reclaim a word which is directed in a race hate way at me, because I'm offended, and it's it's not a case.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to have to draw this to an end. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry, guys. I know there's much more debate, and we're happy to have a debate with Kick It Out on a long-term basis, but I have to draw this to an end.